Hello and welcome back once again to After the Credits. So I'm not going to bore you with all the normal opening entry stuff. Let's just get right into it. Today we're talking about Patriots Day. So what do I think of Patriots Day? I don't know, I'm kind of mixed on Patriots Day. I didn't hate it, but at the same time wasn't really my cup of tea, I guess. For those of you who don't know, it kind of covers the 4 to 5 days following the Boston City Marathon bombing, what the police and the FBI went through to track down the two guys responsible. You know, it kind of fills in like what happened that wasn't covered by the media, and even at like some points the media stopped covering certain things as far as I remember. So it kind of shows you like how everything wrapped up that you might not have seen on the news, even though it does use actual like news footage from when all these events were happening, but I honestly don't remember seeing a lot of this footage. It could just be that I checked out at that point because I didn't hear anything about it for a day or two and kind of figured that it was one of those things that eventually they would talk about once it wrapped up. And I guess I kind of missed the ending of it originally, but now I get to see everything I kind of missed through this movie. The opening of the movie is a little odd because it jumps around into all these different people's day-to-day lives. Like we start out with the Mark Wahlberg character and we're introduced to like him being a cop and what he's going through and all this stuff. And then we like jump over to this Asian kid and at first you're like, okay, I don't see how he's really involved in this. Which does become clear later on in the movie, but it takes a long time to get there. And then you cut to like these other kids on a college campus, and you're like, okay, how are all these people tying together? Then you cut to another police officer from another town. And it's like, okay, well, obviously this police officer is going to end up working with the other police officers. So you kind of see where he's going to fit in, but a lot of the people you're like, why are we jumping between all these people's lives? How do they all tie together? There's no connecting tissue, if you know what I mean. But as the movie progresses, you find out that each of them had come into contact in some way throughout that following week with the bombers. So that's how they all tie in. So of course Mark Wahlberg is working the marathon, the bomb goes off, or the two bombs go off, sorry, and everyone's like rushing around trying to help everyone and get everyone's medical attention and whatnot. And then it kind of goes into tracking down the guys who did all this. And of course the FBI gets involved, and at first they're like, well, whose jurisdiction is it? And one thing I will give it credit for is it realistically depicts jurisdiction. It doesn't have the cops and the FBI fighting over whose jurisdiction it is like you would see on like CSI or any of that type of stuff where like, this is my jurisdiction because this happened. No, it's my jurisdiction because this happened and all that stuff. It's just like, well, are you taking it or are we? The FBI guy basically says, unless we're ready to call this terrorism, it's still your guys' investigation, but if we find any links to terrorism, we'll take it over. Police are like, okay, cool. So they do a little bit of investigation, and once he sees like the makeup of the bomb and everything, he says, okay, this is definitely terrorism, I'm going to have to take it. Okay, cool. We'll still help you out however we can. And the FBI still works with the local police department because at one point he calls in Mark Wahlberg's character because they're trying to recreate the scene in this command center that they have. They kind of have like this map laid out on the floor of all the streets and everything, basically a city map. And they're like, okay, well, we have the bomber on this camera, so we want to backtrace his steps and try to figure out where all he was that day. You know this area better than we do, so if you were coming to this area, what direction would you come in? And who has security cameras that you know of that we might be able to see him on? So he kind of depicts like, okay, well, he could be coming from this way or this way, so check this camera and this camera. So they roll it back like 5 minutes or whatever. They're like, yep, we got him over here. Okay, he came this way. Okay, so from there, check this place. They have a security camera. Nope, nothing there. Oh, no, that one's facing the opposite direction. So check this place across the street from there because theirs faces the street. And they like basically roll it back and roll it back and roll it back until they get a good facial recognition of the suspect that they're following, which eventually leads them to seeing that he's with somebody else, so now they start tracking that guy's movements back as well. So now they have basically a timeline of these guys moving in a bunch of different angles and pictures of the guys to try to run through facial recognition, but because of the low quality of the security cameras, facial recognition isn't quite there. So the local police department's like, well, why don't we just release the photos to the media and say, hey, we need help identifying these guys, you know, this is Boston. You know, everyone wants to help out the city, especially in the wake of something like this. Put it out there, someone will come forward with information. And at first the FBI is hesitant to do that because they're like, well, that's kind of tipping our hand to these guys, letting them know that we don't know who they are, and it could result in them going forward with another attack. So we really don't want to do that unless we absolutely have to. And eventually it came down to the point where the governor's like, just release the damn photos, let's find these guys. So then it shows like how the college kids that it showed earlier were involved because they end up having a run-in with the two bombers. And then it shows how the Asian guy was involved because he later has a run-in with the two bombers. And he's actually the one that kind of helps track them all down. And then it compiles onto when the police are actually track him down, they're chasing him through the streets, they have a shootout, one of the guys gets killed, the other one gets away, and then it's like a couple days later, they kind of put the city onto lockdown, like, all businesses are closed, no one go out of your house, stay away from windows, stay away from doors, don't answer the door unless it's the police, and things like that. And it basically comes down to one guy steps out onto his back porch, he's like, okay, I'm not going to go out front, I'll go out back, and he's going to have a cigarette. He's just going to stand on his back porch, have a cigarette, go back inside. And he happens to notice, like, his boat cover's disturbed or something. So he's like, oh, no one's around, I'll go tie it back down real quick. And he kind of thinks about it for a second. So he calls the police, and he's like, I was out back having a smoke, and I noticed my boat cover's disturbed. I think there might be somebody in there. So the police show up. Turns out the guy's in there. The FBI comes in, basically kind of swats him out. And that's how they end up capturing that guy. And that's kind of where the movie wraps up. Basically just, they caught the guy, one of the two, or they killed one guy, caught the other guy, he's in custody, awaiting the death penalty or whatever. And that's kind of wraps up the movie. Then we go to some actual, like, live segments where they interviewed the actual people from there, not the actors, who were involved in the bombing and whatnot, and kind of get their take on everything. And even the actual people who are being portrayed by the actors in the movie, get statements from them. And it just kind of, like, it promotes, like, how Boston in general kind of comes together as a community when the chips are down. It's kind of like that same thing, like, with New York with, like, Spider-Man, where, I think it was Green Goblin or someone was attacking Spider-Man while he was trying to save some children, and all the city people started throwing trash at him. And it's like, you're trying to attack a guy who's trying to save kids. You're a monster. You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us type of thing. And it's basically saying that Boston has that same mentality, which, they're kind of generally in the same area, so I guess that kind of harbors out from there. And it's basically just kind of saying, like, certain states still hold a strong level of patriotism, where the rest of this country is kind of, like, anti-America now. There's still, like, certain places that are like, hey, we may not get along all the time, but we're a family, and you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. It's kind of that dysfunctional family thing. I can fight with my brother, but somebody else fights with my brother, you gotta deal with me too, type of thing, So it's basically just kind of hammering that point home, and that's why it's called Patriots Day, is the entire city kind of came together under this flag, so to speak, of tracking these guys down, because they attacked not just one person, not just a group of people, they attacked the entire city when these bombs went off. And it stresses, like, how, these bombs went off and everyone wasn't panicking and running around. It was like, once everything kind of settled down, the smoke cleared, people didn't just run, they ran over to help. Like, oh, there's somebody bleeding over here, they'd grab their belt and put a tourniquet on, whatever. And it's like, even some of the people that had their legs blown off, they woke up and see someone laying next to them who's got damage to their leg, and they do whatever they could to bandage the wounds and things like that before worrying about themselves. And it's just kind of showing that camaraderie that you don't get a lot of places anymore. It's like, hey, if something happens, there might be panic for a second, but once that smoke clears, everyone's down to help. Which, honestly, I wish that was the case in more of America, and we wouldn't have all the damn issues we have right now. But no politics, right? It's kind of hard to avoid politics when you're dealing with a movie called Patriot Day that involves people coming together and uniting, which is what this country needs, but let's stay away from that subject. So it kind of promotes that whole brotherhood mentality, which I appreciate. The only downfall I see to this movie is because it starts showing everyone in their day-to-day lives, and it's like, yeah, they're cops, but they're normal human beings too. They make their mistakes. They're kind of goofy. They don't always take everything seriously. They goof around on the job and whatnot. Unfortunately, when you start with that, and then something tragic happens like this, and then you got the one guy who still tries to make jokes and keep everyone's mind off of things, he kind of comes off as inappropriate. And at the same time, when you have a couple people that are like, in spite of all this, you still make me laugh type of thing, it makes them look kind of amateurish and immature. And it's like, I'm really tired of the movies where the military gets involved just for the point of making local law enforcement seem inept. Like I said, in this, they all work together and everything, but it still kind of makes it look like the Boston Police Department doesn't know how to do their job. Like, when people are running through the marathon, there's like this one lobster guy. He crosses the finish line, but then he like keeps running back and messing with people while they're running. And Mark Wahlberg's character has to tell the other cops like 4 times, like, hey, I told you, block this guy off, get him out of here. And it's like, hey, he's back again. What are you guys doing? Are you not paying attention? And it like does that the whole time throughout the movie. It's like, once the explosion goes off, he's like, don't let any more runners through, you know, stop the race, create a barricade, stop people where they are, don't let them into this area. And like, here comes runners running by and tripping over stretchers and stuff when the ambulances are trying to help. Because there's a smoke there, a guy rounds the corner, oh, there's a stretcher here, and he tumbles over. And Mark Wahlberg again, he's like, hey, what are you guys doing? I told you, don't let any more runners through. Anyone else comes through here, it's going to be your ass. And it's like, yes, I know there's a lot going on during the bombing. And it's hard to create those barricades and get people to stop. You know, somebody might have already been past the barricade, whatever. But that ineptitude expands through the entire movie. In the start of the movie, they kick in this guy's door, and Mark Wahlberg goes in and confronts him, and the other 2 cops are just, like, still standing out by the door when they're supposed to be his backup. And he's like, what are you guys doing, on a smoke break or something? Come in here and get this guy. That happens through the entire movie, and even when the FBI shows up, it still continues to happen. But then, like, once you get down towards where the shootout happens, they kind of knock it off and start to actually do their job. They realize, hey, this is serious, we need to step our game up and stop dicking around. But in the meantime, why are you so inept every other day? You know, it's like, you have the ability to be a strong police force, and yet you're inept every other day except for 4 days after something tragic happens. Then all of a sudden you guys harden up and lock down and take your job serious. I just hate movies that make areas look inept like that. Police departments take their job seriously. Yes, there's room for goofing around, but at the end of the day, you're still an officer. You still respect what you're doing. So why do all these movies see a need to show everyone as being inept? And that's what I don't get. And it's like, oh, you have to have the FBI come in and rescue you, and then you got the one rogue guy who kind of goes against. No. That's the way it happens in Hollywood movies. This is real life being made into a movie. So why are you depicting all these people who busted their ass to do all this stuff in lieu of this tragic event? Why are you depicting them as being idiots? Like I said, yeah, at the start, I could understand that. But as soon as that bombing happened, that shit should have been on lockdown in this movie. And no, they still play up the goofiness of every person in the police force up to 4 days later before they finally, like, harden up. I mean, it's kind of insulting. I mean, look at the New York Police Department and Fire Department in the wake of 9/11. There wasn't any goofiness going on there. Everyone got in there, get their shit in gear, and got shit done. You didn't have the one little jokey cop on the side who's like, oh yeah, you can go run into the fire, go ahead, you know. So why depict the law enforcement officers of Boston being like that, leading up to, during, and up to 4 days after a tragic event like that? I mean, it's basically the one nitpick I have with this movie, other than it's kind of a bio piece and they're not really my cup of tea. But like I said, it wasn't a bad film. It's just, it's not something I normally would have went to see other than to do the review on it. I think I've rambled about it enough. What would I give as far as a star rating? I'd probably say a 3.5. Like I said, it's kind of a bio piece, which aren't really my cup of tea. So normally I would have gave it kind of a middle of the road thing. But it was an interesting story for what it was, even though, again, it's one of those events that I kind of experienced live when it happened, and this would have been like better a few years down the road when a new generation was learning about it. You know, it's kind of like all the 9/11 movies that came out a couple years after 9/11 instead of when those should really be coming out like now or in another 5 to 10 years when a whole new generation who didn't experience it like I did is like, well, what was 9/11 about? Well, here's some movies, watch them. I don't know why they see a need to capitalize on something that happened within our lifetime when we experienced it. So it loses a little bit for that. It loses a little bit for the ineptitude of the way they make the Boston City Police Department look, at least during the first half of the movie. But overall, I like that the FBI wasn't all jurisdictional. They actually continued to work with them. They weren't willing to take over jurisdiction until it was proven that it was terrorism. But then again, you still had like the one FBI agent who's like, oh, I don't want to release the pictures because that could tip them off. And it's like, release the fucking picture so we can find the guy, you know. So again, you got like the one inept FBI guy. Why? Yes, they do certain things for protocol reasons, but that doesn't mean they're inept. It means, hey, protocol says we gotta do this. I'd like to sit on this a little bit longer. Not, oh, I can't do that, and being like all whiny about it. So yeah, Like I said, if it wasn't for all that bullshit, it probably would have been a solid 4 of a movie, but because of that, I gotta knock it down a little bit. But I don't feel that it should really just be middle of the road movie just because these types of films aren't really my cup of tea. So I want to give it above a middle of the road, but I can't justify giving it a 4, so it's getting a 3.5. If it sounds interesting to you, you want to learn more about the Boston City Marathon bombing and what went on leading up to the capture of the suspects, check it out. You might enjoy it if you like bio pieces like that. Otherwise, if you're not into that, skip it. If you don't care, skip it. But if you don't care, what kind of person are you? So that's it for this episode. Again, as always, thank you guys for watching. Remember, like, comment, subscribe, share the video. The links are down there in the description. Click the bell up there. Make sure you get notifications every time I post new content. And until next time, we'll see you after the credits.